Hi, Matt.
Hey,
Hey,
what's
guys.
happening, Jeremy?
Oh, it's the top of the hour. A new year. Watch, my desk is going up here.
I like when you have the standing desk because you can always see it go like that.
Yeah. New year, new report. Yeah, this is going to be fun. We've got a bunch of people already joining in the chat, telling us where you're from. I'm from Anchorage, and we've had a bit of snow lately, so the ground's a little bit slippery. It's not too bad. I'm having some furnace trouble, but I will survive. Looks like we've got Greece in the house. We've got Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Wisconsin. We've got Lower Saxony as well. That's fantastic.
Lower Saxony.
Idaho. I know, Ryan. Good to see some friends here. So while everybody's joining, I'll just give kind of a couple little announcements before I really introduce myself. There is, as usual, there's a Q&A function here in Wistia. Please feel free to submit questions throughout. Matt and I will do our best to try to answer them throughout the presentation. If we can't, we'll push that to the end, and we'll be sure to have a Q&A section at the end. So we generally like to field a lot of questions, and this one tends to be pretty interactive. There's also a couple polls. There's 4 really short polls. If you've got time while you're waiting, just quickly go click through those, and we'll kind of share some of those results from those polls as we go through. So there's also this audience chat that we're in. Share where you're from. And heckle, do all the things that you guys normally do, and it's really good to see a lot of friends and some new faces as well. So let's go ahead and kick this off. Sylvia, can we have the deck? Since it's about 3 minutes after here. So we've renamed the report this year. This is now the ISP Network Report because it is no longer exclusively about fixed wireless. For many years, Preseem has handled more than just wireless. And so I wanted y'all not to be confused by the name change. It still does contain information about wireless. It just contains information about fiber as well. So Matt and I are here to kind of walk you through some of the things that we're doing. We've also got an exciting new section. I'm Jeremy Austin, Senior Product Manager here at Preseem, and with me I've got Matt Duench. He's Product Marketing Director with quite a bit of experience in the ISP space, Bell Canada, Sandvine, for 15, 16 years. Matt's been around a while and known to the team. So really fun to have him on here as a new face. And we still have the same big team back at Preseem collecting all these metrics, and it really takes a village to produce this report. And I can't name everybody who's had a hand in it, but almost everyone at Preseem has had some feedback or input into this, and it's one of these things we really like to do. So I'm going to quickly give you just a little bit of a summary, and then I'm going to hand it off to Matt for some of the new stuff, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the operational quality of experience metrics. So if you want to send a link to anybody about how to get the report, that's the link on the screen there, preseem.com, ISP Network Report. If you're if you're watching this live right now, there's a link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen which says download the report here. If you should have already gotten the email with that link, but in case you want to have it and follow along with us while we're talking, feel free to download that now. That is available and public. So quickly, I'm just going to go over the agenda. I'll talk about our methodology. We'll do a traffic comparison. Matt's going to come in and talk about our new operational survey. That's a new section in the report. We'll talk about traffic speeds and delivery, things that are new in that field. We'll talk about wireless and fiber versus wireless, the fun scoop, and then we'll have our Q&A at the end. So quickly, before I hand it off to Matt, I just want to talk about how we collect metrics at Preseem. We collect billions, probably trillions at this point, billions of metrics a day. We're measuring the end-to-end payload of the subscriber experience. So when we give you numbers on what a subscriber is experiencing, that's measured from the actual payload. That's not interpolated. That's not subsampled. That is very granular 10-second metrics of the traffic that a subscriber is experiencing. We do collect some KPIs off equipment itself, and you'll see that when we start getting into analysis of hardware. But when we talk about the subscriber experience, we are talking about it being directly measured. Another thing that we take into account, which is not often seen in ISP network reports, and people talk about global traffic, they usually are talking about kind of maybe some sort of median or mean, an average. They're not really talking about the peak experience versus off peak. As you can see in the picture here on the screen, there is a daily peak that occurs typically in the evening, no matter where you are in the globe. And the experience that the customer has at that time of the day is really the most critical. So when we talk about customers having a good experience, subscribers having a good experience at the peak busy hour, that's when the network is most stressed. It's not significant for us to tell you that the network is working great at 2 a.m. when nobody is on. We really want to know what's happening when the network is heavily loaded. So I'll point that out as we go through when we're talking about something that is looking at the entire day or the week or the month, and when we're talking about things that are happening at peak busy hour. So just wanted to establish that as a baseline going into that. Very quickly, an overview of what numbers that we've seen. 2023 to 2024, that's the window that we're looking at here. We generally run October to October. And so then we crunch those numbers, and here we are presenting them. So the active subscriber download, which is going to be higher than that peak busy hour that I talked about, the active is up to 7 megabits from 6.5 megabits last year. That is a pretty good rise. It's a slower rise than we have been seeing in the past. And we'll talk about some of the factors of why that's the case. The median itself, in terms of how much is being used per day, has risen. It's now 12.7 gigabytes per day, just under 400 megabytes a month for the median user. That has slowed considerably. It hasn't dropped. It's that the rate of rise has slowed down. And we've seen this corroborated across many other companies that produce network reports about what's happening about internet traffic overall. And we can certainly talk and speculate about some of the reasons for that, but the rate of increase is definitely slowing. At the same time, traffic has grown, and we are seeing an improvement in latency. I'll get into some of the details of where we're seeing that. We had 9% last year, which I thought was impossibly good. We have 9% again this year, which is really exciting, because as customer traffic is rising and we're able to maintain an actual good latency and improve it, that points to the good job that Preseem customers, our in ISPs, regional ISPs that we work with, that they're doing an increasingly better job, and that encourages us, because that's what we want to see happen in the marketplace. That's why we exist, is so that customer experience can actually get better. So I'm going to hand off to Matt now. Matt, you want to talk about our new ISP operational survey?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. Really good intro there. So what I wanted to do really off the first part is you're going to see a new section inside of this year's report, the ISP Network Report. And that's really a section around benchmarks, KPIs. And one of the reasons why we wanted to include this section this year is because we talked to a lot of you, right? We talked to a lot of customers. We talked to at shows, whether it's at WISPAPalooza, FISPA, other events around the world, WAPA, even for those joining in New Zealand as well. And a lot of what really comes up is, how am I doing relative to my peers, with respect to key benchmarks? What should I track? How am I doing with respect to churn? Is my own churn in line with industry averages? What about customer support? Do I have enough full-time staff on to cover the number of subscribers that I have? And then even network operations. It's, what should I measure myself against? We hear this quite frequently. And to shed some light on these questions specifically, we asked all of you. We wanted to know. So a new section in this year's report that you'll see that we'll walk through is really looking at an ISP operational survey that we conducted from all of our customers around the world, really to get a sense for how they feel they're doing relative to some of those questions. We wanted to package those up and see if there's some correlations that we could make between some of that data, so that you can use these in part of your daily operations to measure yourself against your industry peers and see how you're doing. And I think there's some really interesting things that have come out here when we break apart these benchmarks, and we'll do this in the further sections down the road here. But first, I wanted to look at some of the highlights that really came out of what we were able to find with some of the data. And the first is around Net Promoter Score. And the majority of respondents who actively measure some level of customer satisfaction, whether it's Google surveys or it's Net Promoter Score, you're doing very well. Regional ISPs are doing very well, compared to the industry average. And I think when we look at this, telecom historically has the lowest industry average when it comes to Net Promoter Score at 31. And just to give you an idea of how Net Promoter Score is really calculated, is you take the net promoters on a scale of 1 to 10, you ask one question. How likely are you to recommend my service to a friend or a colleague? And it takes out of a rating scale of 10, it takes the top 9 and 10, 8, 9, and 10 answers. And those are effectively your promoters. Those are people who are actively promoting your brand or your service. And it takes away everyone that basically responded from 0 to 5 or 6. Everything in the middle is sort of your, they're indifferent. They're not actively promoting, but they're also not detracting from your brand as well. And what you get left with is a score effectively out of 100, which
it's actually minus 100 to 100 plus 100.
Exactly. So it can actually go negative as well.
Yeah.
In this case,
net detractors.
That's right. If you have too many detractors, which is kind of crazy. So I think when we think about telecom, even just from an industry measurement in general, being at 31, it shows you that there's a lot of room to improve. But also with the benchmark that you're seeing on the screen shows you that the high net promoter score that is reported by regional internet service providers really speaks to, I think, the strong brand, the customer service, the sense of community that you're delivering to your customers and to your subscribers. When you start comparing that to larger operators or even folks that are maybe tier ones or incumbents. The next metric to really talk about is churn. And we hear this all the time is, what is a good benchmark for churn? How should I evaluate the health of my customer and of my business? And this metric alone can actually be a really interesting one and an indicator of how things are running. Are they running smoothly? Or it could also be an indicator that there might be some serious underlying quality of experience issues that are affecting the network that need to be addressed as well. So typically a good benchmark to shoot for from an annual churn perspective is less than 3%. Okay. And while this represents a really great benchmark, what we found from the survey that we conducted is that there was more than half of respondents said that their churn is greater than 4%. So there's a lot of work that we still need to do there. Next, when we look at network-related support tickets, so we wanted to take the volume of all the support ticket universe that you receive from your customers. We wanted to say how many of those are specifically network-related, right? Slow internet or maybe laggy internet support calls that you're taking. Something that we found as well, more than 50% of respondents report that they see between 25 and 50% of support tickets that are specifically network related. A really good benchmark to shoot for is having those under a quarter. So under 25% of your overall support tickets are going to be network related. And this is really related as well when we talk about support call resolution. So looking at this final benchmark to keep an eye on, we saw that 52% of respondents are able to resolve those network related customer support calls in less than an hour. So this really gives you an idea of how long it should be taking, to resolve a customer, but also every minute that you're on with a customer is precious time, right? That also starts to potentially impact their net promoter score, your net promoter score, and their willingness to recommend your brand. So now let's take a deeper dive into some of these individual metrics here. The first one we're going to look at is the customer support metric that we kind of talked about. Actually, we'll look at churn first. Let's do that. What we really found here is that a really good benchmark to shoot for here is less than 3% annual churn. The good news is that many of you who responded, in fact, 45% are seeing that your annual churn rates are within this benchmark. They're less than 3%. But there is a great area for improvement here. We saw that 54% of respondents are reporting their annual churn rate is always greater than 4%. And so because we also asked all of you on the survey whether the size of your customer base and the number of subscribers you support, we wanted to see if there was a correlation between your churn metric and the size or the number of subscribers that you have. So does churn adversely affect smaller or more acutely affect smaller ISPs? And the answer is interesting. We do see it does based on these responses. We see that usually customers and ISPs that have less than 5,000 subscribers seem to be more acutely affected by churn than ISPs who have more than 5,000 subscribers. And I think this really speaks to the competitive nature of the markets that you all operate in, as well as the greater resources that larger operators would have access to as well. You have smaller teams, so you need to really keep access on that.
Matt, how does an operator measure churn? Like, what's the best way to measure this? Is this you're talking about monthly churn? What kind of methodology are you using here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So,
or what methodology should we be using as ISPs?
Yeah, and the metric that typically the industry will operate under is an annual churn number. So if you're reporting or you're just trying to understand this based on a period, so it could be a quarter, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take from that previous quarter the number of subscribers that either deactivated or canceled the service and divide that number by the total number of subscribers that you still have. So that'll give you essentially a benchmark for where to kind of shoot for. And when done on an annual basis, then you can start to compare with your industry peers and how others have kind of responded to the specific question.
Cool, thanks.
That's a good one. All right, so next let's take a look at customer support, because I think this is a really interesting one when you think about how long it takes your support staff to specifically resolve a customer issue and what are the root causes of those issues as well. A really good benchmark that we saw from respondents of the survey is that really shoot for less than an hour is what it should take to resolve a customer support call. The good news is that we saw 52% of respondents say that they are able to do this. They're able to resolve network-related support calls within this benchmark under these guidelines. But what we also saw is that 13% require more than 4 hours to resolve the same issues. So it shows you that, as call volumes increase, it gets more difficult to obviously resolve a customer support issue, or when you're reacting to a number of calls, it really lengthens the number of support calls that you're able to take. Another thing that we were trying to really understand from this survey specifically is how many full-time employees do ISPs have dedicated directly to support use cases and their support teams? So on this graph, what you're seeing is we've plotted this as a function of the number of subscribers that are handled by full-time employee. So we can see that there's a clear trend line and correlation on the efficiency gains as the size of the ISP increases. So the number of subscribers that they actively manage. All right.
I've got a question about that one. And in fact, this is I'll take the one from Jeff here. Jeff is asking, like, do we have the ability to rank churn by the age of the hardware or the technology? And do you want to take that one or should I take it, Matt?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Jeremy. Yeah.
So in this case, because this is survey derived, we didn't ask that question specifically. Like, are you collecting the information about what technology a user was on? I would say anecdotally, we're definitely seeing that the older the hardware is, the smaller the plan that it's going to be able to support, the worse experience the customer is going to be having, and the more churn you will be seeing on those plans. We haven't quantified it, so Jeff, that might be a good opportunity for us to do next year to really to show that. We do have some of the data on that. We would have to collect a little bit more information from the operator about what exactly is happening to that subscriber. Did they move? Are they really a net loss? Or in many cases, you see the operator voluntarily moving that customer to a new technology and preventing churn. So just simply having what might look like churn on a particular vendor might not be actual subscriber churn. So good opportunity for improvement there. Hope I answered your question, Jeff. And then there's another one while we're still on NPS here from Henning. It is there a correlation between NPS and churn? And we talked about that. I was hoping somebody would ask that question. Matt, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, we do see a correlation, right? And because it is survey data, it's important to understand that this doesn't imply causation either, but it is we do see a correlation. So typically when you have higher churn, your NPS is lower. And the inverse is true as well. When you see lower churn, your NPS is higher. That was definitely, very, very, we could see that in the data, certainly. But that's something where we would want to more directly link it, obviously, to the cause and effect of that happening. And just to kind of address even Jeff's question previously, too, one of the questions that we did ask that was kind of interesting, but again, it's a correlation, is, are you planning on adding new technology vendors, whether fixed, wireless, or fiber, in the near and short terms? And what was interesting about that was a correlation that came out where if you were planning on adding new fiber technology or new wireless fixed wireless technology, that actually typically respondents had higher NPS and had lower churn. So yes. It was kind of,
we have a slide on that coming up.
Yeah. So not to give too much away, but absolutely. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. So if we move to, there we go. Okay. Yeah. So let's cover now. We'll go a bit into network operations a little more and just kind of look at the network related support tickets that folks kind of responded to here. And a really good benchmark to shoot here is for all the support tickets that you take in 25% of those being, or less or fewer, being network related support tickets is a really good benchmark. We saw that 76% of you that responded to this say that this is already the case at your company, at your operator, where less than 25% of your time is really spent resolving those network performance related issues like slow speed or high latency or laggy internet, etc. But what we did see is that the flip side of that is that 25% of folks that responded to this question say that they spend more than a quarter of their time resolving these specific issues of high latency, of slow speeds. So we can kind of see that there's a bit of work that still needs to be done, I think, on the improvement side there for network related support calls and how you can more proactively address those so they don't become issues and you don't have folks waiting in the queue to have a support call resolved. And then we talked a little bit about this, but is there a linkage between Net Promoter Score and network operations efficiency, right? We looked at Net Promoter Score and churn, but what we saw is that, again, a correlation we were able to make in the data that we saw from the respondents in the survey is that network performance seems to have a direct correlation on customer satisfaction. So, for example, we saw ISPs that reported they had a high NPS of greater than 61 in this case, as that benchmark would indicate, report that they saw that they only saw a quarter of their support tickets were network related. So it shows you that really investing in the network and doing so proactively and making sure that things are operating properly actually does impact your subscribers and your customers' quality of experience. And so that was kind of interesting. And then we talked a little bit around how that impacts churn, how churn and Net Promoter Score are related as well. But I really think, again, just to kind of highlight that point, that the proactive network management and network and subscriber access management really does impact the subscriber satisfaction as well as retention from a churn perspective, being able to lower that.
Yeah, it's nice to see the actual numbers behind the things that we've been saying for a while. It's nice to prove that this is true. And there's a lot more in the report on this as well.
That's right. Great. That's right. The last to cover here is just around access technology. So we talked a little around this, but we wanted to get a sense for how you're growing. Where are you investing in the network? Where are your CapEx decisions really being spent or focused on in the short while? And what we saw is that many of you are planning to add, you're planning to add new vendors in the coming months. In fact, the good here to focus on is that if you are planning to add new access technology vendors to the network, you're more likely to spend less of your time on support use cases. So that's kind of interesting, where if you're making those investments and you're making sure that the operation of the network is kosher, then you're really likely to see fewer of these performance related issues that are affecting the quality and that are affecting the experience. The flip side of that coin is that we saw those without plans to expand either their fiber or fixed wireless plant were also reporting they were the ones most likely to report lower Net Promoter Scores or customer satisfaction scores. So I found this really interesting because when we look at this holistically, we see that 36% of respondents are planning on considering adding new access technology vendors, and it doesn't matter across fixed wireless or fiber, within the next 12 months. So it shows you that from a capacity planning perspective, many of you are really focused on investing in the network, making things a really great experience for your customers.
Awesome. And Matt, this is a really great time to throw up the result of the first poll. Sylvia, if you could do that. We asked, what methods are you using to measure customer satisfaction today? And it's interesting that nobody actually chose NPS. It is an industry standard. Matt, you wanted to say a couple words about how easy it is to do, because you probably are collecting some of this info already.
Yeah, this is really easy to do. Similar to a Google review, you can add this to your website as a little widget. You can actually ask this question even in an email to your subscribers.
A post support survey.
Post support survey. I know many of you, when we talked,
we got one.
There you go. There's one. When we talked at Wispapalooza, it sounds like there's even some of you that have their technicians that will actually, present that support ticket or that the survey directly to your customers after a support call or a technician visit or a truck roll. So that's really interesting. That's a really good point as well. Simple survey, just as you touch a button when you're leaving, a restaurant to say, "Hi, how was the service?" You can do a very similar thing. So I see that this is actively being updated here as well.
Good job, guys.
We have a few people that actually track Net Promoter Score. So phew, that's good to know. But Google reviews as well, that's a really great method.
Yeah.
And I know that many of you use Google reviews to track customer satisfaction. But how you're doing it, and I think not only what we wanted to highlight here is really that this gives you a benchmark of what you need to focus on, and some methods and methodologies that you can kind of put in place if you want to track this for yourself and you're trying to get a sense for how likely or the willingness that folks are to recommend your brand.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Okay, I think we're going to continue on with the next section. Thanks for that, Matt. That was great. That's new material for us, and probably some new material for some of you guys as well. So really, really fun to be able to share that with you. Hold on, I got to get to the right slide. There we go. So now we're going to quickly go through 3 more sections of some of the stuff that's in the report. We're not going to cover the entire report. It's a lot more pages than we can get through. But first, I'll talk about traffic and usage and delivery, because this is kind of the benchmark of what are we seeing change year over year. That's not just a single one-dimensional number. So the first one I'm going to show you is gigabytes downloaded per day by technology. So here I have 2 different lines for the blue line is fixed wireless, and the dotted red line is fiber. And this goes back to that initial number I was telling you about when we look at bytes consumed per month or bytes consumed per day. There isn't one single number. There's a very long tail to the right of this. Most of you who are ISPs will have experienced this. You have a few subscribers who use a ton of data, and then you have a lot of subscribers who don't use a lot of data. As you can see, the mode of this data, the peak of this is right around, it's less than 10 gigabytes per day, right? That blue peak there on the left. And the red peak is only slightly to the right of it. So we'll dig into that a little bit more, the fiber versus wireless, as we go along, and about why the fiber is to the right of the blue. Why are people using more data on fiber? That's kind of fun to look at. But it's important to remember that when you're looking at a big data set like this, where even if you have just a few hundred subscribers, you're trying to extrapolate from those subscribers. You have to remember that an average is often meaningless as a predictor. You really have to look at the shape of the distribution. I'm happy to be able to give you more details than you might be running on your own networks. You can produce these graphs for your own networks, but often it's a little bit difficult to do because it's a lot of number crunching. So the next way that we'll look at this usage data is again looking at it both a median and an average. And as you might expect, because of that long tail, the average is higher than the median. The median is more predictive of that, what we would call like the typical user. If you're trying to make a prediction about your network, the median is going to be more useful than the average, because all it takes is one Jeff Bezos to raise the average income level in the room considerably. But if he's in a room of 100 people, it doesn't raise the median stays the same, right? So year over year, we've seen again some change here in fixed wireless. We're seeing a 12% rise for data consumed per day. That's about 6 from just over 5 gigabytes a day to just over 6 gigabytes a day, 5.5 to 6. And then similarly, the average, we saw that go up a little bit less, which means that the bulk of users are actually seeing a bigger increase than the extremities, which kind of makes sense, because as the extremities are going to slow down themselves, you'll see that shift. What we are seeing though is still a shift toward a higher rate of consumers. As we're kind of normalizing out to the limits of what people can consume. I mean, we're seeing this already with 4K TV, only so many TVs in the house. Traffic usage, it kind of does level off at some point when we're consuming all that we can. We can get more efficiencies with AI and stuff like that, but we are beginning to reach the end of traffic increases and the shift toward focus on quality of experience, where latency is now the real driver of the experience, not the speed plan. We don't show a year-over-year comparison for fiber here because this is the first year that we're actively breaking fiber out and showing this to you this way. These numbers are higher, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that as we go along, why we're seeing higher usage on fiber, as we saw in the previous slide, than wireless. From a busy hour online load perspective, just to recap, to go back to that that diagram of the peaks, we are wanting to know, okay, how much data, what's the average throughput per subscriber? If I'm doing capacity planning, I'm adding in a new part of the network, or I'm going to be getting some more backhaul to maybe a new upstream provider, a new peering. How much capacity do I actually need per subscriber? Not just the active, but all the subscribers, active and inactive together. And this chart looks very similar to last year. It's just a little bit up and to the right from what we saw before. The slope is also very interesting because that gives us the indicator of what is the ratio of download to upload, with download being on the horizontal axis and upload being on the vertical axis. So that ratio is kind of holding steady at about an 8-to-1 slope. We still see a pretty solid distribution where the median user is still between 3 and 4 megabits peak busy hour load. So if you're running a quick back of the envelope calculation, note that we do have, in this chart, the ISPs are, each individual circle is an ISP. And so you do have ISPs who have a peak busy hour load that's north of 10, but they're the outlier here, right? They maybe all they have is fiber, What's really interesting is to see how closely everybody really hews to that line, that you have very few ISPs where there's a significantly higher upload than others. This is a really, really nice tight correlation here on that slope. So you can kind of see where if you figure out how much bandwidth you're pushing at peak hour divided by the total number of active subscribers that you have that are active and not on vacation or whatever, and you can come up with the same number for yourself.
And Jeremy, there you mentioned technology as well. Do we actually have that broken down by technology?
I did, and I left this in as a mistake because I was like, Matt's going to ask me about this. We did break this down by technology to see, is there a meaningful difference between fiber and wireless? And we did not find a meaningful difference in peak busy hour load. This is consistent with what operators tell us anecdotally as well. So we have to look somewhere else to see why are fiber users consuming more data overall. If the peak busy hour load is about the same, why are they consuming more? And we'll get into that as we go. So I'll fix this in the report. But yes, originally this was broken down by technology. And I looked at it as like, there's no difference.
So to call you out on that one.
So we kind of went back and forth on that one. Thanks a lot. It's like an Amish quilt. You got to leave one flaw in, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so now last one in this section is latency, and we will come back to latency. This isn't the only latency chart that we're going to look at. To remind those of you who may be less familiar with how we measure latency, this is not internet latency. This is ISP latency. So this is from typically the core of the network inbound toward the subscriber. So this incorporates any part of middle mile and last mile that the operators has direct control over, and then the Wi-Fi and Ethernet in the home of the subscriber, or at the business, if it's a business user, that the operator maybe only has indirect control over. So we're measuring the entire path here. And what we can see is this one is to show you the year-over-year comparison. So the blue line here in the center with the peak, you can see that peak is shifted to the left of the green line that's just below it. And similarly for the cumulative, the dotted line is showing the cumulative distribution. This shows that we are seeing a leftward shift, which is really good. I also broke fiber out on this one. So you can see that fiber latency, the baseline latency, is definitely a good deal lower than wireless, as you might expect. And you still have a long tail, though. These upper percentiles, P99s of latency, P95 to P99, are still going to be elevated. And we'll talk a little more about that when we get back into the fiber and wireless section. So David's asking, can we send these to the NTIA? I hope the NTIA reads our charts, for sure. It's public info. So next one, we're going to go on and talk about wireless specifically, and then we'll get back to fiber again. So we've got some vendor updates for you. I want to caveat this again to remind you that this is our view of the market. This is not intended to be a comprehensive survey or predictor of what's happening in the overall market. We do have a very good sampling of the market, so we expect that it will be representative of broader trends, but it's more about the directional shifts than it is the hard numbers, 10%, 5%, whatever is going on. It's about relative comparisons here. We are not pretending to make predictions about where you should be investing your money. This is not intended to be the legal advice, shall we say, or fiscal advice. So first we'll talk about what we're seeing for in wireless. What happens when you load up a wireless access point? What happens to that latency, that customer experience? We're measuring both the P80, so the 80th percentile. That means that all latency samples will be better than the 80% of latency samples will be better than this number. 20% will be worse. On the vertical axis, we're measuring the 5th percentile, which is essentially representative of idle latency. What's happening when the network is not really under any load at all. So as you might expect, if you look at the center of the bottom, you will see some milliwave radios, like the Wave AP Micro. You'll see LTU rocket unloaded, EPMP 4500. And you'll see a RBW APG, that's a MikroTik 60 gigahertz there. And as you might expect, the latency, idle latency on those that equipment is very low. And when you load it up, we see a shift to the right. We're still going to see an additional, in this case, 40 to 70 milliseconds of additional load. So you could still have the same induced latency problems under load if that bandwidth is not well managed. So no big shifts there. It's still interesting to see. So we have some newcomers on this chart, in particular the EPMP 4500 and 4600. So you'll note that the 4600 has, in general, a better response under load than, say, the EPMP 3000s, as you might expect. It's a new generation of equipment. There's still going to be a rightward shift when you're loading this thing up. You'll also see that if you look at the kind of the upper center there, as we start looking at these other, Wi-Fi based and proprietary based solutions, the PMP 450 and the Tirana, the green circles there, they have very similar performance profiles when you load them up. Just the limitations of the physics and the technology. There's not radical differences there. Certainly nothing like what we see when we compare wireless to fiber. So essentially, you're really seeing some tight clustering in performance. Ubiquiti and Cambium and Tirana. They're not wildly divergent in terms of latency when they're under load. We will see some divergence as we move on through this and look at some of the other metrics, though. Let's see. Do we have any questions about this? I realize I've been talking for a while. We've got some billing. Yeah, okay. We'll hold those to the end, I think. Okay, so then we've got a vendor update looking at both the CPEs and APs. There's always an interesting story to tell about this one. So Ubiquiti is still seeing some growth here. We saw a really interesting shift. Normally, in the past, you've seen kind of approximately the same shifts in CPE and AP, where I think in the past couple of years, Cambium was seeing higher growth in higher density, and Ubiquiti seeing higher growth in lower density. That trend is still continuing here, where we saw a 1.5% rise in Ubiquiti CPEs, but almost 5%. Rounding up to 5% rise in APs. And that is being driven by lower density radios. So radios that are designed to handle fewer subscribers and give them a higher quality of experience. So the milliwave, the wave APs being a good example of that. The MikroTik, we're still seeing some growth there. There are some vendors who've fallen off our table. We keep a threshold of at least 1% in one of these values. So the total percentage of vendors that don't meet that criteria has stayed the same at 0.8. There's no, I'm sorry, at 2%. It's risen to 2%. It has risen a little bit. So we have seen some additional vendors fall off. So the number of vendors that are failing to meet that minimum 1% criteria has risen in the past year. I do expect to see eventually some more airspan. Right now, we are we're definitely seeing some growth there, but because airspan is still being counted separately from Mimosa here, it's not being combined in. So I think we will see some perhaps reversal of that Mimosa trend a little bit in the next year. Tirana is really the big story here in our metrics, where we've been, of course, collecting metrics on Tirana for quite a while. And last year, what we saw was a pretty big explosion in the number of APs, as you might expect. Operators went and put a bunch of APs in the field. And what you're seeing this year is you're seeing the actual proliferation of CPEs on that. So we still saw some growth. It looks like we went from 2% last year to almost 3%. With Tirana, so that's like a 50% rise. But if you look at the number of CPEs in the field, it more than tripled. It went from 1.97 to 6.22. So we'll see that this densification as the product becomes mature, and you'll see that in some remaining charts as well. I'm going to move on. When we look at the number of connected subscribers that we see across, again, this is not a prediction, this is an analysis. So the light blue being the average that we're seeing across all the access points, the dark blue being the P95 or the 95th percentile, and the gray being the maximum that we've seen. In previous years, we've seen some I think I remember seeing like a 189 maximum on a Cambium 450M. It looks like, that number will fall as bandwidth consumption increases. The total number of subscribers that you can put on an access point is going to decrease once you've hit saturation, and maturity is what I would call that. So we do see some, really Taronic growing in densification here, rising to meet the challenge, and we're getting up there. We've actually exceeded the P95 on one of those Toronto models. I think that's the 5 gigahertz version. I'm sorry, I don't remember the model numbers off the top of my head. They're differentiated by what band they're in there. So, and the biggest one we see is 187. So very similar to what we were seeing kind of maximum on Cambium 450M a few years ago. So not much change as you might expect in the more Wi-Fi based ones. We've got some LTE in here as well. Ubiquity wave is definitely rising in terms of the saturation here. It looks like an average of 3, P95 of 10. So that's kind of keeping that trend going toward both densification on the larger sector side, and then faster plans with fewer customers on the shorter range equipment. So okay, and then for throughput itself, now that we're beginning to see equipment reach maturity where you're being loaded up with more subscribers, we are seeing higher numbers on some of these. So the 450M is still looking about the same in terms of the P95 on there. There are definitely going to be cases where you're going to see more peak download. Again, I didn't put the maxes in here on this one because sometimes that can be a little bit misleading. So in terms of the actual throughput values, since we aren't measuring, we're measuring a window throughout the year. We're not measuring the entire year. So I'm trying to be a little conservative on that one. But there's very definitely a story here where we're seeing, the Toronto models are definitely delivering a significant amount of bandwidth at peak in the P95. Okay, I think I can move on to the next section. I'm going to go talk about now fiber. This is our last main section here, and it looks like we are going to just have time to get it in under the wire. So I'm going to keep moving here pretty quickly. So for latency here, this is another way to look at latency. We look at both the peak times and all times, and if we see a significant difference in latency at peak versus all times, remember all times include the idle time. If we're seeing a significant difference there, that's going to point toward a certain amount of congestion in the network, because congestion is one of the biggest reasons that latency is going to rise. We are still controlling it here with our open source and custom modifications in our inline appliances. So this is controlled latency. It's not completely unbounded. So this, customer would be having a worse experience without Preseem. This is not intended to be predictive of a network that does not have Preseem in it or a similar tool. But you'll notice that there's very little difference in the 50th percentile for fiber. We do see some divergence in this bottom blue line when we start getting to the 80th percentile. And I'll show you some more details about that, where we still do see rise in latency on fiber networks. The good thing is this is still better than last year. We are still improving, again, as we said, about 9% year over year. So it's exciting to see that. And speaking of that here, looking again now, instead of just looking at 2 percentiles, we're going to look at the distribution of that percentile. This is going to be a more full picture of, you can think of it as a probability distribution. How likely are you to experience a particular amount of latency at a particular amount of load? So again, we're concentrating on slightly higher extremes. Instead of the 50th and the 80th, we're looking at now the 5th and the 95th. So you can think of these as the two ends of that bell curve, the 5th being the idle, the 95th being the loaded. So for wireless, as you might expect, you see a peak in latency, the dark blue line, right around 20 milliseconds. That's about the amount of average latency that's induced by one wireless hop. So if we think about fixed wireless being an additional wireless hop with often Wi-Fi at the end of it, as expected, when you then load that up, you now see the center of the blue peak, the flat blue peak is at it's right about 55 to 60 milliseconds of latency. So that's the standard rise that you'd expect to see when you're kind of in your worst case scenario. I've chopped this one off here at 100 milliseconds. There's going to be a long tail going out to 200 milliseconds. So ideally you want as few packets as possible experiencing increased latency in those upper percentiles. And there are a number of tools that we have to help you achieve that. On the fiber side, there's also an interesting story. One, there is still some increased latency at idle, and that's going to be induced by wireless in all of these cases. Wireless in the home. Notice it's a little yellow bump, little dotted yellow bump, right about 30 milliseconds. So you're still going to have some packets there, even at idle, that are going to be experiencing elevated latency. Parts of the network that you can't control. And then under load, we still see a significant shift, up again about one wireless hop to that 20 milliseconds. So we're seeing that induced load in the home when that wireless begins to get loaded up. It's still very well worth controlling for and making sure that customer experience can be managed. The fiber itself removes one of those wireless hops, that we don't have to manage that anymore, but there's still a good use case for optimization. And the NPS numbers and churn numbers reflect that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got just a couple more slides here, and then we'll go back and try to hit your questions here. There's a we want to get back to that original question of why is fiber throughput, why is consumption so much higher on fiber? And here's part of the story. Here we're looking at peak versus all times. So again, when I said if we are seeing a big delta between in the download between peak and all times, then that's going to point toward constraint. As we see, there's a little bit more of a we do see some differences on the wireless side. If we look at that second bar from the left, I don't have a pointer here. I'm sorry. I keep wanting to reach out and point at it. 5.68 versus 6.99 for all times. So slightly elevated throughput when the network is not busy. But then you look at the P95, and that difference really begins to go away. When the user is really heavily downloading versus just consuming an average amount of data, there's really not a big difference between peak and average. And that's actually really good news, because it means that the operator, the fixed wireless operator, is doing really about the same level of job that fiber is doing, and we have to look elsewhere to explain the discrepancy here. The upload is another. This is on the right-hand side is the upload chart. This one is a little bit more interesting to me, and that is, you'll see that there's almost no difference between fiber and wireless over all times. These averages and even the P95. I'm sorry, at peak times, but at all times we do see a difference, and I believe this is explained by one, on the wireless side, upload is often not saturated, so you can't really be very predictive with these numbers because most people aren't uploading very much. Mm-hmm. We don't even usually show them on the same page. The upload is not usually constrained. On the fiber side, usually they're going to be more symmetric plans. So plans that have maybe a 2-to-1 ratio or a 1-to-1 ratio versus what is often, a 10-to-1 ratio on the wireless side, just due to the nature of the fact that we have less spectrum allocated for upload than for download. In general, that's going to be okay. We are not seeing a bad experience resulting as a result of upload being asymmetric. So it's still nice to have more upload. You kind of get on and get off. It's definitely improves that customer experience and definitely improves the latency, but it is not necessarily indicative of a hard need. Most people do not need symmetric plans. Last chart that we're going to show. This one is one of my favorites because this one answers the question that I've been asking all along. Why are fiber users using more data than wireless? And if we look at this, you'll see that the solid lines are fiber in this case, and they start at about 50 megabits here. There are no small plans that we're reporting, that we can report on here. We're reporting on ones where we have a significant pool of data, so if there's, 2 users at 72 megabits per second, we're not going to, put that as a point on the line. We will incorporate that in. We do use some statistical binning to smooth this out and make this usable. But you'll note that the fixed wireless plans and the dotted lines go all the way down to almost zero, right? To 1, 2, 3 megabits. There are still wireless plans that are being served. So the question is, what causes this slope to rise? As we move to the right, as the download plan speed increases, we would expect an increase in data usage. The faster you can get on, the more you're going to end up using. It's more convenient. The faster the higher quality your TV stream may be running at. There's a very clear causation there and a very clear correlation. What you see, though, is it's the same thing we saw last year. I put this out last year as well. There's a very strong knee. As you begin to go below about 75 megabits per second, the user begins to be constrained by the plan. The plan can't actually deliver as much demand as they are having. So if we compare across the entire spectrum, as we did in all of these other charts, all of these plan speeds, we see that we have a significant number of wireless plans, let's call them legacy plans, in the wild, where people are paying good money because it's meeting their needs, but it is holding them back in terms of how much data they would consume. So when we compare apples to apples, a 200 megabit fiber plan to a 200 megabit wireless plan, those users are consuming almost exactly the same amount of data. Not a statistically significant difference here. They will be experiencing better latency on the fiber, but they are still having a very good experience on wireless, particularly if it is a milliwave model with low latency anyway. So breaking this down and actually saying, okay, what are the real differences between these technologies? What we find it's that you can sell bigger plans on fiber, and so you're going to see different customer behavior there. It's not inherently a difference in the technology. So wireless is still competitive. It's really fun to see that be happening. So, so just to quickly go back over, since we're nearly out of time here, we still want to hit that below 3% churn benchmark. Happy to say latency is still improving 9%. We're still seeing AP growth in some new technologies, and there's still all kinds of cool wireless technologies coming down the pipeline. If you look at the next few years, what's planned and what's possible via the physics, it's still a very exciting field to be in. And fiber, we're seeing, yes, good latency. You still need to be able to manage the in-home Wi-Fi, and we're seeing the same ability to deliver a plan. If you're measuring apples to apples when you look at fiber versus wireless. So I still want you encouraged to get the report if you haven't done so already. It's got a lot more in it than we covered here today. There's the table of contents for you, and I'm going to quickly jump to Q&A. Matt, do you have any questions before we go to the public?
No, not offhand. That's awesome. I mean, you could tell there's a ton of analysis in there, Jeremy, and it's really neat to see. I think just the differences between fiber and wireless usage, and really that there isn't that much of a wild difference. So I think that's pretty interesting. But
yeah, from a usage perspective, for sure. Yeah, I'm on Starlink right now. I have applied for fiber. It hasn't been built yet. The backhaul has been built in my neighborhood, and I'm really looking forward to having that, particularly since I do want more upload speed. But I'm actually okay on Starlink. It's I wish I could say worse things about it, but it's reasonably functional. They do some active queue management. So we've got a few questions here. Let's try to churn through them. So Ron Valdez asks, have you evaluated spectral efficiency by vendor? And the answer to that is yes. Last year we put out a detailed report on that. This year we opted to keep it out for time. There's not a big shift from last year to this year. So look for that to come back at some point, because particularly when we see new entrants in the marketplace, it's really fun to watch that. We didn't have anything new to say on that front, Ron. So definitely feel free to download or I'm not sure. Sylvia, can we still get to the 2024 report? Hopefully. I think they're on our website where you can still get to them. The 2025, we left that one out for space, but again, there's no big shifts there. Then we have a few more coming in. We have, I can't scroll this. Let's see here. Two different PMP 450 micropop listings. For total bandwidth at peak. I'll have to get back to you on that one, Chris. And we'll have to see what the difference is there. There would be, it means a different model name typically is what's going to be happening there. Ryan, your question on the 4600L versus 4600. Yes, that's correct. If there's not enough data, we don't show it. We want it to be statistically significant, which means there have to be quite a few in the marketplace. And when you have a new model in particular that's maybe being slowly rolled out, or maybe has some deployment problems potentially, we want to really be sure that we're giving you data that you can count on. Because in some cases, you're looking at something where there may be 100 in the field, 100 APs in the field, versus something where there are 10,000 in the field. And that's really not a fair comparison, right? I'm going to make that one public. Let's see here. And then Chris's. And Henning is asking about reliability across technologies. I believe that's going back to the question on the NTIA's discussion about what makes a reliable technology or not. That hasn't been fully defined yet, Henning, to my satisfaction. So we don't track that explicitly. There's definitely should we be able to define that? That might be something that we could measure, but I don't feel that that's adequately defined at present. And Christopher asks again, are all the charts presented in the report? They're all in the report. There are no charts here that are not in the report. You can have them. We're not, no secret sauce here. And then Chris asks one final question about TCP acceleration, where the TCP latency would be artificial. So basically, if you were to split the TCP connection into two, then you have a portion where the latency is going to be masked by that split connection. So we are going to be measuring. In all cases, if there are cases where there are TCP acceleration happening, we would be wanting the operator, because the operator has control over this, to measure that independently, and so that we can be reporting on the correct, the true end-to-end latency within the network. So I'd like to know more about what you think Toronto is doing there, Chris, for TCP acceleration. I don't have evidence of split. And looking at the latency data, as I showed you in the report there, where it looks almost identical to the 450M, I don't see evidence of TCP acceleration happening. Maybe some other kind of acceleration, but not the classic split TCP connection happening. Anything else coming in? I'm happy to stay late if anybody wants to keep asking questions.
There was a question just about the charts presented in the report. So yeah, everything that you saw here today is available in the report that you'll download as well, Christopher.
That's good questions, guys.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Okay. Oh, Court, nice to see you on again. Let's see here. I think I answered Jeff's question. Yeah. Okay. It sounds like we've really hit it on the head in terms of getting everything answered. Rick says, "Is it still morning?" The sun came up while I was talking to you, Rick. I have, you know, there's just a few months of having to deal with very little light. I've got windows in my office, and just make sure to turn on the lights with a timer so I can pretend that the sun is coming up. But yeah, it is earlier here. Thanks, Rick. All right, guys. Awesome. Feel free, again, you've got our email addresses on the wall here. Feel free to drop us a line. Anything you want us to include in the next survey or next report, I'm happy to have discussions about that and follow up. Please feel free to share the report, share that with anybody whom you like. We really find that it has has a lot of uses that you know really can inform a lot of decisions, not just at the business level if you're an ISP, but even policy. If you're somebody who's interested in making broadband better for your users, making sure that dollars get allocated where they should go. Mm-hmm. I come at things from an engineering perspective. I always say you can only engineer what you measure, and if you are wanting to provide a good experience for your end users, you've got to measure it. And so we're very happy to do that every day and get these results to you year after year. So thanks very much for hanging out with us. Again, thanks, Matt, for coming on and doing the first ever operational survey for us. And it's been really great hanging out with you guys. And we'll say goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon, Matt.